Cool, good afternoon. So how is everyone? Excited? Good? Oh, excellent, great. Writing a book like this was always kind of a dream of mine, is to really understand what it takes to build something amazing and great, right? This doesn't necessarily mean $1 billion. This means something that is great. And how can you actually find that perfect combination of factors to build a business that people want at the right time, the right product, the combination of all these magical things. But what I really wanted to find out kind of in this process was the reality of this, right? The media today sells us so many things. It's easy, 19-year-olds can do it. Anyone can do it. Well, if you've been around a little while, you know nothing's particularly easy in life, and the media is prone to massaging things in a convenient way. But that was really what I wanted to dig into, and we'll kind of dig into a variety of things about that. I think we've already talked a little bit about kind of my experience and kind of what I've done, but I just want to set the scene. Does anyone remember this little piece of metal kind of flying a couple hundred miles up in the atmosphere? Anyone remember what that was? When did it exist? The Mir space station. Early in my career, I was really, really lucky to work with an entrepreneur who was completely crazy. He made hundreds of millions of dollars on 1-900 numbers in the US, helping people figure out their futures and fortunes. He made over $200 million, allowing people to call up these numbers and finding out what the stars were saying for them. And kind of ironically, or perhaps poetically, he also piped in $80 million of his own money to try and turn the Mir space station into an orbiting space hotel, and founded a company called Mir Corp. They actually financed a number of missions to go up to the Mir, private Russian astronauts who are basically paid to do this via their space agency. And we also helped this young gentleman, Mr. Dennis Tito, become the first fee-paying space tourist and space civilian to go up there. And this was a hugely formative experience for me, because my background is aerospace, and I studied rocket science at MIT, and always wanted to become an astronaut, but was hit with the harsh reality that, you know, every 10 years or so, they take 6,000 overly qualified applicants. About 10 of them make it through training, and about 1 goes up every 4 or 5 years. And, you know, there's a big backlog. So I was like, well, maybe I won't do that. Maybe I'll go into tech and see whether I can pay my way up there, like Dennis Tito did, and was lucky enough to be kind of part of this mission. What a lot of people also don't know is that this young gentleman, does anyone remember what band he was from? NSYNC, that's right. We, some Lance Bass fans over there. We actually worked with Lance all the way up to the wire to try and get him into space, and actually he bailed on the mission 2 weeks before takeoff, so we would have had a pop star in space, but unfortunately, you know, the realities and complexities of this world didn't allow that to happen. But it was that mindset that put me into technology. It was that mindset that really allowed me to kind of face the fact that, you know what, if you are trying to do something amazing and good, your idea is rubbish. In fact, your idea is crap, because no one will believe that it'll work, because people only believe things that have happened. People will look in hindsight and be like, yeah, that app was a brilliant idea. Well done on getting 10 million users, once you've got 10 million users. But when you're starting off and writing the first piece of code and designing the logo, everyone will tell you it's a terrible idea and you'll never succeed. So we'll go through a few stories about the guys who have actually created a number of these apps. But today I want to talk about 3 things. I want to talk about hearts, pirates, and people. Or, slightly differently, building products that people love, or building things that people love. A thing called pirate metrics that we'll dig into, which basically allows you to kind of understand all the components of kind of product development and product marketing to build something successful and to be brutally honest with yourself. And 3, the fact that people are, in fact, the key to everything when you're building software and tech companies. So here are the billion-dollar apps. And what I focused on in the book was really understanding the stories of the entrepreneurs and how they built these fantastic mobile-first companies. There are a few more now. There are obviously billion-dollar apps that have spun out of big billion-dollar businesses. But what I wanted to take away from this, and the couple of examples that we'll go through, is what it takes to build an astoundingly successful, sticky business today that's mobile-focused. Just because 60–70% of our activity is mobile and growing, and so that is something that's a bit more relevant when we're talking about tech. So today, mobile is still much more the art of reinvention and adaptation, and it's less being incredibly creative and individual and different, but it's much more, if the clicker worked, it's much more about execution. It's much more about strategic approaches, and it's much more about understanding your enemy or understanding the market and knowing what to build when and for whom and why. And some of the speakers today have really kind of talked about this. So let's kind of break it down a bit. Today, we spent 86% of our time in apps. Right, that's crazy. So mobile web is a bit of a disaster. You know, if you're going after something that's going to be successful, it's an element, but why would you focus there? Something else has also changed over the last few years, which is this magic number 27, which is, in fact, the number of apps that we all tend to use per month. So it's actually capped out at about 27. And what's happened over the last few years is that some apps have just got so good, whether they be in messaging or social networking or commerce, that we don't need to switch them anymore. In fact, they're innovating so quickly that they're staying in the number 1 or number 2 position. And frankly, we're pretty happy with the apps that we have. But what's even more distressing, and again, if you're really thinking like an entrepreneur, is 0 is actually the average number of apps we download per month. Which is really weird, right? Because we're actually downloading way more apps than we ever did. But when you look at the distribution of who is downloading how many, you suddenly see that the vast majority of people are pretty happy with their smartphones. They're pretty happy with the apps. They work great. I've got my Facebook, I've got my Amazon, I've got, any other kind of app on there that I really enjoy, and it's actually fulfilling my need quite well. So what do I do kind of as an engineer if 75% of people's actual time in terms of minutes is spent in the top 4 apps, right? A lot of which are owned by this wonderful fellow, right? Is it all doom and desperation for me as an entrepreneur? Now, should we all just break down and cry, or is there actually an opportunity here? Well, I think there's a great opportunity still here. And so let's go through an interesting kind of story. This was written by a couple guys who decided to create a company, and they just really wanted to build something that people wanted that would work. And so they stuck this up the very first day when they kind of created their company. They were nice guys. They looked like typical kind of engineers, very fit, obviously go to the gym, work out a lot. But both of them worked at Yahoo for 20 years together. Then they decided to quit and create an app, and they were like, dude, we're going to create an app. It's going to be absolutely amazing. This was sort of 2008, 2009, and they're like, we're going to build something on the iPhone. This is going to be absolutely phenomenal. But unfortunately, in the process, the app creation didn't quite work out. So they applied for jobs at Twitter and at Facebook, and one of them continued on kind of building this app, and actually, he was a bit depressed. It took him about 9 months to kind of iterate through various kind of different versions of the app, and he came up with this. And it was really interesting. It started out, looks kind of nondescript, right? And the first version of his app that ended up being quite a powerful idea was really a status update app. And what he was so kind of interested in was, how can we allow people to kind of communicate through this app? And, for the first 9 months, he was struggling. The idea wasn't very good. The concept was, I'm at the gym and I want to set it to busy. Maybe I'm going to integrate this kind of notion of status updates and my address book. And frankly, it didn't really work. And when he was just about to kind of give in, he started talking to his users. And he started talking to some family who were using the app. And he found a small pocket of users who were actually using it to actually communicate via different parts of the status update area. And he started to dig into these and said, well, what are you guys doing? And they're like, well, this is actually a really good messaging app because we actually live in the Ukraine, and he's originally from the Ukraine, but lived in Silicon Valley. And they were like, well, you know that actually text messaging from the Ukraine to the US costs about 35 cents per message. In the US at the time, it was expensive, but not quite that expensive. And he's like, well, that's really interesting. And also, they said, in the Ukraine, we don't have the iPhone. It just came out in the US. We actually all use BlackBerry because it's super cheap. So he went on rentacoda.com, literally, paid $2,000 and got someone to build a BlackBerry app. And so he tuned around a few versions of it and actually sort of pulled out the status update and then turned it into a text messaging app. And once it was a text messaging app, and once he had the iOS version, and once he had the BlackBerry version working, he went from about a few hundred active users a day to 200,000 downloads in a week. And interestingly, that app we all kind of know today, and the reason why it was so popular and purchased by Facebook is that when you look at its growth compared to anything that we've ever seen, it was monumentally huge. And in fact, the time it was purchased, it was 50% bigger than the world's SMS volume. Right? These guys built the right thing at the right time, pretty much by chance. They were lucky. They were technically capable, but as you can see, they couldn't pass an interview for Twitter or Facebook. So they weren't that smart. But there was a combination of persistence, of finding a really interesting opportunity, and the value that this application created was absolutely phenomenal. And the best bit about this whole thing was when they were purchased by Facebook, there were 57 guys supporting the traffic volume of every telco in the world, right? And so that's why they were worth a $20 billion price tag, which at the time of purchase was 15% of the market cap of Facebook, and as a result, Yarn's actually on the board of Facebook as well, which is, fantastically interesting, right? So how do they do this, more importantly? What can we learn, right? So they built that app, right, on BlackBerry, which was a fascinating choice. No one else would have done that. No American would have gone down that route. But because they were immigrants and understood the hardship and the cost of some of these services, they saw that opportunity. They went after a network effect, and to this day, one of their strategies that is utterly different from everyone else is, we're all snobs here, we don't want to support Windows Mobile. They're like, you know what, every mobile platform we want to support, so this is ubiquitous. They're not going to make it pretty, they're not going to make it sexy, they're going to make it ubiquitous and cheap. And day one, their business model, which evolved quite frequently, which is really interesting as well, because they adapted to the difference in the market, was 99 cents up front. They're like, 99 cents, download the app and you get unlimited texting. And at the time, in 2009, that made sense because if I send 3 texts, this thing pays for itself. And over time, that evolved. They took the 99 cents and put it as a yearly subscription, and then at one point, they actually removed it. And that was actually super key to their success because they generated enough revenue to actually pay all their costs and pay all their staff. Barely, but it kept them out of the jaws of investors so that they could operate independently. So how do I do this? The number one metric, and this comes straight from the mouth of a good friend of mine who started Candy Crush and King Digital, is if you want to understand what success means in mobile, it's day one retention. How many people who downloaded and use your app today come back tomorrow without being prompted? Magic number. If you want to understand what that kind of market fit is, it's how many people voluntarily come back. So you can test it really easily. You don't have to talk to people, you don't have to do anything, even though I do advocate that. But that number will tell you whether you've built something that resonates with the second bit that's really important, which is the kind of quality traffic or putting this in front of the right users. If Yarn and the WhatsApp team had put that app in front of a bunch of kids in Silicon Valley, it wouldn't have really worked. But then again, they could afford a $700 phone when actually the market was disrupting text messaging, which in the US was cheap, but internationally was not. So whether that's a combination of luck or foresight or a bit of both, that's the kind of opportunity that we need to be able to sniff out. Finding that market fit and creating something that people love at the right time is the magical bit. But if we look at that curve, there's actually another company that actually did much better, not in terms of necessarily user growth, but in terms of revenue, right? When we think about, holding our finger up there and hailing a vehicle and an app, and this pains me to talk about Uber because I was one of the team who started Halo, but, one must take a hat off to these people and their incredible level of execution. It's absolutely phenomenal, right? It's a $65 billion company in 60 countries, 300 cities, and they're doing 1 million rides a day and generating about $10 billion a year. But how did they do it, more importantly, right? These guys were the masters of, whether you like them or not, brutality and execution. They went out there and stormed the world with their playbook about how to roll out a high-frequency, high-margin service. And this is where the pirate comes in. So the pirate is for the R metrics. And anyone building product, anyone who's an entrepreneur, so easy to remember. But these are the magical stages, and a lot of people forget these stages. And sometimes you can collapse them, but in general, these 5 things are absolutely critical, right? How do you acquire a customer? How do you activate them? Activation being the thing that you want them to do. Is it sending a text on WhatsApp, or is it taking their first ride on Halo? Or is it filling in their first form and buying their first insurance on GoCompare? Or how do you activate a user? How do you change a user into a customer, into someone who brings you value? Once you've got delivered value to someone, how do you retain them? How do you get them coming back? How do you get those guys to generate revenue for you at some point in your life cycle? And then in fifth place, but still super important, can you build something so great and lovely that people will actually talk about it to start continuing this virtual circle of referral, therefore decreasing your acquisition cost? And funnily enough, it all kind of feeds into the same circle. Uber were the masters of price. They understood that down the line, not necessarily initially, that price was the biggest driver of frequency and adoption of their service. And Travis, their CEO, stated mission was to make transport as freely available and therefore as affordable as running water in any city or every city in the world. But he also understood that, to really modulate to really modulate frequency, you really need to modulate price. And so they really focused on this one concept, which was, how do you get the first ride for free? If I can get you over the hump of actually trying my service, I know it's so good, so convenient, and so simple that you'll keep using it. Luckily, they have a business model, and it's high frequency, so they can actually make the revenue to pay for this upfront cost. But that was really interesting. One of the ways that they started to do this, and we'll go through a few of the techniques that they employed so incredibly well, was they were the first guys, and they went after Google so they could appear in Google Maps. They wanted to be another transportation option. There's walking, there's public transport, there's driving, then there's Uber. No one was advertising in Maps, which is one of the most popular apps in the world. In fact, it's a top 3 app in something like 120 countries in the world. So the visibility is absolutely enormous. They wanted to appear there. So that's how they got in there. That drove huge amounts of acquisition for them. They also did really cool stuff, like making you pull out your app and associating it with really cool, fun brands like Spotify. So you would pull it out while you're actually driving. They also worked quite well in terms of other partnerships. And in fact, with Concur, which is a company that does expense processing in the US, not only did they realize how much they were growing in the B2B market by actually analyzing data from Concur, but they actually went back to Concur and said, how can we acquire your 25 million customers by giving them free promos and actually advertising B2B via you? They received a similar amount of customers by going through Spotify. All these are beautiful two-way mechanisms to acquire new users. But they've also focused on amazing detail in their product design, right? This is Uber Kittens. On one day every year, you can get an Uber to deliver you kitten. You can also have Uber bring you ice cream in some countries on a hot day. You can also order an Ubercopter in other countries as well. But why is this even interesting? It's because the PR is the product. The product is this ability to have on-demand transportation. On-demand, take me somewhere that I need to go, or bring me something that's of interest, right? The latest numbers about Uber Eats, 30% of their revenue. 30% of Uber now is us being hungry and having an Uber driver or an Uber cyclist bring us food. They are on demand, and they are on-demand mobility. Their PR is focused on how cool the feature is. It's not some esoteric commercial like we have in the perfume industry that's all about, lifestyle and some man splashing out of the ocean, which has got nothing to do with perfume whatsoever. The PR that we see is, holy shit, I really want to order a helicopter with my app because that's just cool, and it's possible, which is even weird. Another thing that they've done incredibly well is win-win. So when you do referral, it has to be win-win for it to really work. If I refer you and give you a free Uber ride, that means I should get a free Uber ride as well. And does anyone remember this guy? Or does anyone remember Jared, the king of Uber? He was huge in the US because in the early days, when you could actually give referrals to people to get your first Uber ride for free, you could actually change your username or your referral name. So good old Jared changed his name from Jared123 to Uber $20 for free, and then posted it online in a whole pile of places, exploited SEO, got massive amounts of traffic, and ended up generating in 1 year $50,000 worth of Uber credits. But here's the best bit on top of that. Any normal company that doesn't think straight or creatively would have slammed him, tried to shut it down, and be really upset about it. Instead, Uber came to him and said, and made a whole media campaign out of him and said, you know what, ride free Uber for life because you're just really smart and we like you. So they double down on that kind of tactic. But let's not forget, all this good stuff around user acquisition and activation is not free, right? These guys are spending hundreds of millions in online advertising. This is not the virality that made them. The virality is part of their marketing mix, and these guys spend more than most companies will ever make in revenue. One of the other critical bits to actually understanding how to make great products as well is really about data. And internally at Uber, there is this one fantastic tool called Morpheus. And Morpheus, I'm not sure whether the animation actually works, so it does, is a fantastic data tool that allows anyone in the company, and right now I think there are about 5,000, 6,000 people or more just kind of in the corporate HQ, including 14 full-time economists, but everyone has access to the data of user behavior. They understand what users really want before they even know it, and can build new products off the back of it. And in fact, it was their data strategy that really led to the innovation around Uber Pool, which is now responsible for about 20% of their overall revenues. So, build things people love. Don't forget the pirate metrics and kind of dig into them. It's all about that acquisition, the activation, the retention, the revenue, and the referral. And one little example. You know, we've talked about these billion-dollar guys, but does anyone remember this game? Oh, we're all too young here, fantastic. Has anyone played this game? What's it called? Crossy Road, exactly. How old was the person who built this? It's a 19-year-old Aussie kid. This one was really interesting. It took him 6 weeks of building and 6 weeks of refining. In the first 3 months, he made $10 million in just advertising revenue. Right? Phenomenal. Wow, any kid can build a game. Kinda. That was his 43rd game that he'd built by age 19. And he partnered with a guy who used to be a senior exec at one of the world's biggest gaming companies. And together, the two of them built this in 6 weeks, with 6 weeks of refining. It's about the execution. It's about the timing. It's about a great concept. That game now makes about $100 million a year and has a team of 19, funnily enough. So you can still find the opportunity, but it doesn't come easy. It doesn't come first time. It's not that simple. So the last bit is really about the people. It's about that mindset. It's about being an entrepreneur, whether you're working in a big company, a small company, a company of one, or you hate your job or you love your job. It's really about what you can do. And I think one of the most important points to realize as you're building a company to try and get to this success point is really understanding this kind of hierarchy of people's needs and what people actually want to do. And you're very rarely ever going to succeed unless you kind of master this notion of what people really want to get out of their job and out of the products and the services that they're building. And I think one of the things that's made the world very challenging, and especially tech today, is this whole notion of money and how we remunerate people. And when you look at this, and you look at how profitable the world's best tech firms are, you're looking at the revenue per employee is absolutely outstanding. You know, the reason these guys can pay not only great salaries, but also have Grateful Dead cooks and free meals in every one of their kitchens and have slippery slides in all their offices is because they run phenomenally profitable businesses, but they spend tons of that money on people. Incidentally, we should put Go Compare on this slide because we're actually the same level as Microsoft. Even though we have 210 people, we make about £750,000 per person. We're a very lean company that believes in culture in a very kind of similar way to this, and the output per person is astoundingly big. A lot of these companies also invest in superstars or 10x employees, especially in terms of tech. Not all people are created equal in tech. Some people are just way smarter, and you can get a lot out of them. But one of the things that is also very valid that companies like Google and Facebook and Microsoft have really exploited is that even though we may have these amazing engineers, which can change the world, and they do, what we can look for in employees, in co-founders, and in people in our own companies is T-type personalities. Who's heard of T-type personalities or T-type people. Cool, we need more of you to understand this. In a nutshell, it's people who are either deeply analytical or deeply talented in one domain, but who can operate across departments. They're people who can bring depth to a party, but yet they can party with everyone. They're people who really want to work within a company as a whole, but yet they're a marketing expert, or they're a computer scientist and fantastic at coding, or they're an amazing product designer. It's a team of those people who have that transversability and that depth that ultimately allow you to create small teams that focus on big challenges and really deliver amazing products. So the last point that I really kind of want to focus on is this element of culture. Airbnb is a really amazing company that realized that they were doing incredibly well externally, but internally, they weren't doing so great, and they made this very explicit effort to make Airbnb the place where everyone wanted to work. And so they invested in culture. They've got a great campus. Doesn't quite look like that, but the picture's pretty amazing. I'd love to work there. And they canned the whole concept of HR. We are not resources, to one of the other speakers that I kind of talked about. Who wants to be referred to as a resource? Instead, they brought in the concept of a CEEO, a Chief Employee Experience Officer. How Silicon Valley is that? But flip it on its head. Who doesn't want to be the most valued person within a company? Would you prefer to be a resource? Or would you want someone to curate your employee experience? I don't know. I'd much rather work kind of with a company with this guy, right? The bit that's so important too is not only would we want to be part of that, but in the market today, millennials have surpassed Gen X. These kids who have grown up, entitled about everything, and now the biggest part of our workforce in the US and now the UK. We need to adapt to that. So, in summary, focus on things that people genuinely love. Great products will always win. Combine that with a really rigorous view, and just remember the pirate metrics. And if you remember those two things, you can pull it all off with amazing people. And if you're interested in the long-form version of it, feel free to grab a copy of the book. And there's obviously wonderful people from here, Go Compare. And we preach and try and believe this kind of whole philosophy internally as well. Thank you.